Hey everybody, CVH here, and today we're going to be doing another Budget-ify video on one of the pre-constructed theme decks that accompanied the release of Heroes of Skyrim a couple months ago. We already did the A-list Companions Budget-ify video, and today we're going to be taking a look at Alduin's Apocalypse, the spell sword deck you can see in front of you here. We're going to be buying it with 500 gold, and the goal of this series is similar again to the goal of the Budget-ify series in general. In that series, I like to take an established archetype, an established deck list, and make it more budget-friendly for newer players by removing all of the epics and legendaries, monthly reward cards, and cards from expansions you'd have to buy with money or gold, like Fall of the Dark Brotherhood and Madhouse Collection, and replacing those cards with cards that are commons and rares from the core set or Heroes of Skyrim. But the difference is, of course, this time we'll be taking the Alduin's Apocalypse theme deck and trying to make it a bit more consistent while remaining within the constraints of the Budget-ify series as a whole, and I'll be taking away some of the cards that I don't think need to be in this deck and replacing them with commons and rares from the Heroes of Skyrim and core sets. And then I'll be talking a little bit about more expensive cards you could use. Obviously, these theme decks do come with some epics and legendaries, which is why they're so great as far as value is concerned. But I will be talking about some other epics and legendaries and other cards you could be using in these decks to move it forward and make it more competitive. Let's buy this deck and get started with some replacements. Alright, so we have the Alduin's Apocalypse deck in the collection manager right here. So let's talk a little bit about the general idea behind the deck. Clearly what they were going for when they made this particular theme deck seems to be a slower strategy. Definitely, if we look at the Magicka curve, not as low at all, with no emphasis really on the 2 and 3s, as we saw in the A-list Companions deck, or just any aggressive or mid-range deck you might see on the latter period. Definitely a heavy emphasis on the guards. We have the Snowhawk detachments. We'll be keeping those in there, even playing Imperial Camps. That's one of the cards we're going to be winding up cutting. But then at the top end, we have, I'm not going to say it's the most powerful late game ever. That's why I would tend to think about this deck as a slower mid-range deck that could get aggressive, because if the game goes too long against a fully built, completely blinged out epics and legendaries controller ramp deck, this late game is just not going to compete with that. We only have one Manticore and one Alduin really, and just some pretty decent threatening, commons and rares. Basically what we can work with given the requirements of this being a theme deck that we're going to be using the Budget-ify restraints on. Commons and rares, along with some of the other cool tools we've gotten. And we did get some cool tools. Edict of Azure is great, Manticore is great, but we'll be trying to make this deck a bit more consistent and give it the flexibility as long as it's remaining budget, because we can take it a bit slower against a very aggressive deck. This deck should be able to do that with the massive amounts of guards it has and the massive amounts it'll have after the updates as well, but we do want it to be able to be still a bit aggressive in case we run into one of those control decks with some really threatening cards, basically, that we can start closing the game out with, because if we take it too long, this deck's card quality in the very late game is probably going to make it suffer, which is a lot of the reason a lot of my budget decks do tend to be aggressive, and a lot of the control decks and ramp decks are very hard to make budget. Let's start by cutting some cards that make this deck a bit inconsistent and just don't really need to be here, much like we did with the A-list Companions deck. I'm going to be cutting the one of Encumbered Explorer. It's an okay one-drop, I guess. I wouldn't be mad about having it in Arena, but I think we can make better use of the spot. Dragon Cult Ghost, this card is deceptively powerful. I think this card might have a place somewhere. I don't really think this is the deck for it. Theoretically, it looks like it can fit any part of the curve, but in reality, it's always going to be a little bit lackluster no matter when you play it. And you can technically play it whenever, but you're always just playing a vanilla with stats equal to the cost. On turn 5, it's a Tusked Bristleback. On turn 4, it's worse than a Stone-Tooth Scrapper. On turn 6, it's worse than Spine of Elder's Blood, and I don't really think the flexibility makes this card worthwhile. I'm also going to be cutting the Dragon Tail Savior, which, as I mentioned, is a really good 2-cost. We didn't put those in the A-list Companions deck, but I will be already falling back on the Midnight Snacks and Ancient Lookouts, and I have another 2-cost creature in mind for the slot. Next, I'm going to be reworking some of the 3-drops. We have 3 copies of Mentor of the Watch and 3 Tree Minders. Now, I think giving Guard something is probably a bit good for this deck because we have a lot of higher cost things that don't have Guard. It would be nice to put Guard on them. I do have another card in mind for that, and I just think there's so many good 3 costs in this color combination, basically. Cliffside Lookout got buffed to a 2/5. That makes this one of our priority cards to have early with this deck. But Tree Minder and Mentor of the Watch, to me, just seem like they could be better cards. Tree Minder is a fine ramp card, but we don't have Hissgroves in this deck. Hissgrove is kind of the reason you'd want to be ramping, and our late game isn't really even that impressive. We curve out at 6 and 7 with these 2 dragons, and beyond that we only have 2 cards that we'd really care about the ramp, so Tree Minder more often than not I think is going to be dead. And yeah, it could be one of the ideal things in the version they presented us to have on turn 3, but there are definitely some better 3 costs we can include instead. Gonna be cutting 4 more cards to finish the cuts here. The 2 copies of Imperial Camp and the 2 copies of Dragon Plate Armor. I don't think any of these cards that I'm about to cut are particularly good or powerful. I tend to stay away from them in Arena as well, just like they do fit the theme. Obviously, the Alduin's Apocalypse theme deck, You know, it is a theme deck, right? It's supposed to be going for guards and dragons. Dragon Plate Armor seems like it works well with dragons. Imperial Camp seems like it works well for a guard theme. But in practice, these cards just have a really low power level. Even if you get them to good effect, even if you get Dragon Plate Armor with a dragon in the discard, it's still +4/+4 for 4. Even if you get the Imperial Camp with a couple guards on the board, it's still not giving you that many more stats. And is that even really relevant? I don't think either of those cards in the best case scenarios make up for how bad they are in the worst case scenarios, so we'll be trying to make this deck a bit more consistent by cutting those. Fortunately, I do have some replacements in mind. These replacements aren't really going to be doing too much to the top end of the curve. I did mention this deck, it kind of wants to take it a bit slower, but that is limited due to the Budget-ify restraints. We can't have the late game of a Ramp Scout with the commons and rares and none of the Fall of the Dark Brotherhood cards, etc. So this is just kind of what we're going to have to fall back on. But there are some good options for the early turns, and we'll be starting off with 2 copies of Execute, just another good removal of 2 copies, because there's space for other things as well. 2 copies can add to our already impressive, I would say, suite of removal cards. We have 2 Devourers, an Edict of Azura, 3 Piercing Javelins. That seems pretty good to me. Execute just a really fine removal card early. It also can sometimes work with the Karthspire Scourge, which can reduce the attack into Execute range. And then I'm also going to be including 3 copies of one of the best 2-cost creatures in the game. Dragentail Savior is up there for sure, but I'm going to go with Windkeep Spellsword. And honestly, I wouldn't really blame you for wanting to play 3 copies of Dragentail Savior over either of these. But since this is a theme deck and I want to keep it mostly within the theme for this video, I'll be leaving in the 3 Lookouts and the 3 Midnight Snacks. Objectively, yeah, I would say Dragentail Savior is probably the best card out of those 3. Windkeep Spellsword I do think is the best, period, so we'll be playing that because it trades so well early in the game. We definitely have to replace the 3-cost cards we cut. I would like to again give a nod to Dark Guardian. We mentioned this in the Ayla's Companions deck. I can't include it in today's video because it is from the Fall of the Dark Brotherhood, meaning if you didn't buy that expansion with money or gold, you don't have access to this card yet, but it is a great card and a great expansion in general. And Dark Guardian especially fits this theme because we have a lot of emphasis on guards here. It works very well with the Snowhawk detachment, and it's just a really good card to help us bridge the gap and get to those powerful threats of the late game. However, to replace the Mentor of the Watch we took out, giving other things guard, this is something that East Empire Crafter can do extremely well. This card is a powerhouse in Arena, so I'll be including it in today's deck. I'm not sure exactly how amazing it's going to be, but it does have an ample supply of targets in this deck, I think, namely the Spines and the Iron Scale Dragons. Giving those guards is kind of what the Mentor of the Watch wanted to do anyway. And also this card does work with Cliffside Lookout now. It also works with the Dark Guardian, so if you wanted to play both of those, I wouldn't fault you for that. But to make up the space for one more 3-cost cards, as we did take out a fair amount of them, I'm going to be including the good old standard Young Mammoth. Young Mammoth is just an amazing card, 3-cost 4/4. It can, again, function as both an aggressive and defensive card. The fact that this card can beat up basically anything that costs the same, like if they play an East Empire Crafter, you play a Mammoth, you're going to be able to trade defensively, but if you want to start turning up the pressure, Young Mammoth is a fine card to do so, and Mentor of the Watch and Treeminder just didn't really have any offensive capabilities whatsoever, so Young Mammoth, I think, does a lot for this deck in terms of versatility. Only 2 cards left to replace, and I'm not going to be doing anything too crazy with those slots. I'm just going to be taking the opportunity to include the 3rd copy of both Midnight Sweep and the 3rd copy of Hive Defender. And apparently I'm going to play 1 premium copy of each because that's what I clicked on first out of habit, but that's fine. The Hive Defenders and Midnight Sweeps just seem like fine cards for the deck. They're fine budget cards, and Hive Defender is seen in basically every yellow deck, period, as a 3-of, so we should probably play it in this deck, especially due to the fact that we're trying to protect our Cliffside Lookouts, get East Empire Crafter synergy, get Snowhawk Detachment synergy, and win games in general, which is what Hive Defender is good at. And Midnight Sweep, we're still focusing on guards somewhat, and it's a fine card again to add a little bit of power to the board while helping us protect our important cards and get to our late game cards. Alright, as it turns out, I had to switch the copies that were premium to non-premium so it would all fit into one concise screenshot, but that is the deck after the updates I'm going to be doing to it. Before we get into some games in casual to see what we can't say about the lines of play and take some wins, I'd like to talk about a couple cards that could be in this deck but are not currently. We've already mentioned Dark Guardian. Again, it's an amazing 3-cost guard. I would prioritize more copies of Edict of Azura, very flexible removal. I'd also prioritize more copies of Preserver of the Root, which objectively is a much better card than Midnight Sweep. I would definitely, with this deck it's interesting because you could make it a more of a mid-rangey aggressive approach, which is what this is going to look like in today's video, or you could just really go for the ramp control strategy. And if you want to do that, the Treeminders would probably come back in. You would definitely want to get your hands on 3 copies of Histgrove, which are, oh, they're right there. There you go, the end game most ramped decks want. And if you're going to be doing that, even if you want to focus on the mid-rangey dragons, I would suggest trying to get Undying Dragons, and I would also suggest trying to get Skeletal Dragons, and this is especially true if you want to play the more control or ramp-oriented version of the deck. Skeletal Dragon can really help you in the late game. Between the Hiss Groves and the Skeletal Dragons, maybe adding Soul Tear as well, that could give this deck the late game at once if you want to be committed to being a control and or ramp deck. There's also Nahagli, which is just, you know, a card that should be in the deck. We're focusing on dragons and guards, and it's one of the best cards that has dragon and guard on it, so we should probably be playing Nahagli, but it's a bit out of range of the Budget-ify deck. Cards to cut. Karspire Scourge, not a great card. You could remove some of the emphasis on guards if you have that much more powerful of a late game. The Spines can stay, especially if you're a ramp deck. Iron Scale Dragon is more expendable. It's more, you know, basic. Essentially, it's just a vanilla. 3 copies of Manticore should definitely be in if you want to be playing that late-game ramp-oriented strategy. But if you want to go more mid-rangey with Undying Dragons and trying to close the game faster, maybe you could even cut this for more reliable mid-game options. Alduin, ironically, unless you're going for a very slow ramp style of deck, I don't actually think this should really be in there. I would probably cut it if I was being perfectly honest from the deck we have now for a card like Nahagli. But it's in the deck, it's the namesake of the deck, so for today's video I'm going to be keeping it. But I definitely think the other late game dragons are more versatile and more well-rounded. I would probably either include Parthenax as a late game threat or Odahviing as a late game threat before I included Alduin. I'd probably include both of those two before Alduin. You could play all three, and that might be right if you're going for, again, the super slow, super defensive ramp style of deck. In today's video, we don't really have that, so I don't expect Alduin to be a live play more often than not. However, I do think this deck is capable of taking some wins, and hopefully, if you're interested in this starter deck, it made it a little bit more consistent for you and gave you a little bit of ideas on the directions you could take it in the future. As always, if you've enjoyed the video and enjoyed the games, feel free to leave a like, stay subscribed to the channel for more Legends content, follow my stream in the description. I'll see you guys next time. It seems like a pretty solid hand. I'm about to just keep it all. Good way to start. Double East Empire Crafter, nothing to do with him yet though. Looks like we've got a very aggressive warrior deck as our opponent. And that is okay with me. Hopefully we can show off this deck's defensive capabilities a bit.
This day will be mine. If we die together.
Unfortunately, it does get its bonus right now. If we had the ring, we could play that Revered Guardian. That would be just the best. Just the best. Looks like we can just play this, though. Get something out there to stop all this incoming damage.
We'll see how they like someone who fights back.
Oh, okay. Shadow Mirror. It's an interesting trade to take. But there we are. Okay, so we can trade in and play the Guardian, and I think that's gonna be good. Would be nice to get some healing in this deck for the more aggressive matchups. Maybe Knight of the Hour. Again, another Fall of the Dark Brotherhood card. If you go the control spell sword approach, you'll notice most of those decks, the fully built ones, are playing cards like Knight of the Hour. And an Undying Dragon, like I mentioned, the great option. The third East Empire Crafter. Still not a whole lot to do with it. The Scourge is actually solid this turn. Gonna kill the werewolf just in case of any werewolf synergy. For free.
I am ready to join the circle. The day is mine.
Ah, he is getting the werewolf bonus. I can never execute anything. Guess I had another Scourge, I guess. I don't even know if that'd be great. Well, we could just play double East Empire Crafter and set up for a giant guard Iron Scale Dragon. And I really don't mind that.
Taste my steel. Taste my steel.
Yeah, this deck does look somewhat familiar since we did the Budget-ify on the Ayla's Companions deck yesterday. Alright, Iron Scale Dragon it is. Maybe give him to actually no, he has one more Afflicted Alit in the deck. Alright, let's just pass. I mean, it's not the Budget-ify version exactly because there's an Earthbone spinner in there. But I did suggest that, so I don't know if we had a part in this.
My arrows shall fly true.
I think it's about time for... We could Devour Edict. That might be better than another Iron Scale now that I'm, you know, getting that play available to me. More Magicka efficient. I like it. Maybe keep the first one from harm's way. The third Triumphant Jarl. Jeez. What a beating. And the Mudcrab Ankle Snapper. Well, that's just gonna die. Guess he's given up that lane entirely. Good news. I could, like, have defend a Young Mammoth. Pick another Iron Scale Dragon's probably just a bit better.
Die like a dog.
No reason not to use this, right? Another Giant Guard Regenerate. Not quite as large as the first. Empire Crafter can be pretty good sometimes. But if these were already like Nog Leaves and Skeletal Dragons, you probably wouldn't need the crafters. Turn these into Dark Guardians, turn these into Nog Leaves, Skeletal Dragons, Undying Dragons. It's more efficient. Way more expensive, but more efficient. I think this deck had better epics too. We got Manticore and Edict of Azure. That one had like Child of Hercene. The bad version of Night Shadow, Night Predator. Alright, so I think could just play a Manticore on that thing. This also gets the buff even though it already has guards. I'm gonna smack him down to 26. I might start hitting him next turn. Could just like go for lethal.
Care to join me on the hunt?
It's good ordering. Just in case he gets that back or Sharpshooter or Mudcrab. This is like very poetic, isn't it? Playing against the other Budget-ify deck. $23 damage on board. It's not quite enough to kill him. Unfortunately. We could go for another Iron Scale Dragon and a Hive Defender. Magicka efficiency. One thing's for sure, he's never breaking through. Three guarded Iron Scale Dragons, so we have successfully shown off the deck's defensive capabilities. And next turn will be the turn where we show off its ability to transition into aggression. And if we had killed the Blackworm with the Javelin instead of that, he could have like chained Blackworm Necromancers if RNG was on his side. Blackworm into whatever. So killing the Hunt Maid was better there. In case you guys didn't know about my Javelin choices. Don't know if I mentioned him. We're gonna finally have an execute target. It's too late. Oh, now we have too many executes again. Damn. Alright, let's just start attacking. I think we're good to go here. I can't imagine anything really stopping us here.
I am ready to join
Not.
the
Oh,
circle.
we can execute that one too. Nice. Alright, nice. The Budget-ify deck versus the other Budget-ify deck.